analyzes macro and micro capital market trends, particularly as they relate to new or novel securities offerings. Prior to becoming chief of OCMT, Amy served as senior special counsel in the Office of Chief Counsel in Corporation Finance. She is also an expert in the digital asset space and plays an integral role in our FinTech working group, focusing on areas involving capital formation. Finally, to Amy's right, we have Josh Dickman. Josh is a senior counsel in the Division of Enforcement, and he is working out of the Atlanta Regional Office right here. He serves as the Atlanta office's representative to our cyber unit, which is our newest specialized enforcement unit, and he has worked on a wide variety of cyber investigations during his time with the division. He is the co-chair of the cyber unit's account takeover subgroup, as well as a member of the dark web working group. He has all these great titles. And the microcap fraud task force. So please give a warm welcome to all of our panelists. So before we go any further, I'm going to give the disclaimer that you heard earlier today, that we give at all of these events, that the statements that are made today by myself as a commissioner or by our panelists are our own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the commission, or in my case in particular, another commissioner. Nothing we say today is or should be taken as definitive of the applicable law, and nothing today is or should be taken as a comment on any particular submission, proposed rule change, or anything else that's pending before the commission. So that's, you can tell we're mainly filled with lawyers at the commission. With that out of the way, let's get started. I thought a good way to begin might be for Val to give the audience a brief overview. On some level, the Bitcoin ICO topic is broad enough to give us days of material. I don't know how long you guys have. But given that we may have folks in the audience who are less familiar with the area, I thought it'd be helpful if Val gave us a high-level overview. What exactly is a blockchain? What is Bitcoin? What are ICOs? These are terms the audience probably hears quite a bit, so can you help us sort it out?
Thank you, Commissioner Stein. Is this on? Thank you. So I'm going to presume that not everybody here knows exactly what the blockchain is. I'm sure you've all heard of Bitcoin and ICOs, but since we don't have a lot of time, I'll try to give you a very high-level overview to level set the conversation. You can think of, you've probably heard blockchain in all kinds of terms, even that it can solve world hunger or any other kind of problem. But at its base, it's really just a technology, and it's a very promising technology. But it is a way that one can keep track of the transfer of assets on a distributed ledger in a way that you don't have to rely on a trusted third party to help facilitate that process. So you can kind of think of a blockchain as a combination of a huge Excel spreadsheet, for example, that many individuals participating in the network have access to and can read and write to and verify transactions on all kind of at the same time. So you're taking kind of an Excel spreadsheet and you're combining that with the internet and you're adding a little bit of cryptography, a lot of cryptography to make it secure. So if you think of the internet as a way of transferring information back and forth globally, the blockchain is really just a way of keeping track of the transfer of assets globally. So a lot of people have heard of the Bitcoin blockchain. The asset on that blockchain is the Bitcoin, and really it represents some value, some asset that has value because the folks in the network and the folks all over the world who transact using Bitcoin have agreed that it has some value. So, in fact, you can use Bitcoin to transfer that value into a fiat currency on some exchanges. You can use Bitcoin to purchase goods and services at various retailers across the globe. So in essence, the blockchain is really just one big database that many nodes who share the blockchain database can write to or read to, depending on how it's permissioned. This technology has a lot of promise. It's been talked about as a secure and efficient way to keep track of, for example, we're talking about securities, the transfer of securities, or the recording or settlement of securities. And it has promise of efficiency, and we want to keep an open mind at the Commission in terms of inviting innovations that are good for the market and innovations that are good for investors, and change the way perhaps that an investor might interact with the market, or the way that perhaps securities can be issued and distributed. And that brings us to another application of the blockchain, which is essentially the ICO, or initial coin offering, or coin launch, which many of you may have heard of, and I think the chairman alluded to just a few minutes ago if you saw the opening remarks. But in this way, this is an application of the blockchain technology where folks are using it to create a set of digital assets, usually referred to as coins or tokens, as a way of kind of crowdfunding or raising funds for some project. And in many cases, the project is not yet developed, it's not yet built, it's an idea, and these things are kind of marketed using white papers or internet posts or blog posts, YouTube videos, any mean of social media to get the word out. And the promoters of these ICOs typically are trying to raise money to fund their project or build their enterprise or build an ecosystem. And maybe one day that ecosystem would have some kind of use for these tokens that relate to goods and services offered on the ecosystem. But at the time that these tokens are launched or issued, oftentimes there is no use, and it's really a way to raise money for whatever project it is. And in many cases, what we're seeing is that's essentially a securities offering. So you'll hear a little bit more about our test for that. But essentially, if people are pooling or contributing something of value to a common enterprise with a reasonable expectation that their investment will go up in value, either because the coins become more valuable at some point in time, or there's some promise of a return or a dividend or return on investment. And based on the kind of managerial and entrepreneurial efforts of others, then that meets our definition of an investment contract, which is a security under the securities laws. And in that case, all the securities laws would apply to that offering. And we'll learn more about that. But that's basically a nutshell.
Thank you for the nutshell. Amy, I'm hoping you can answer another background question that might be on the audience's mind. Specifically, why are we talking about these things at an SEC conference? Why is this a topic for federal securities regulators? And other than it's just plain fascinating.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think as Val has pointed out, what is represented in a digital framework or format still runs through the traditional securities law analysis. If you're raising money, regardless of what you're using to raise that money, if you're raising money and you are going to be using it in an enterprise, say to build your project or build your platform, and people will be relying on you, and all the money is coming together, that's called common enterprise, and all your money is getting put together to be used to develop this platform. And you as the holder of this digital asset, whether somebody calls it a token or a coin or something else, I like calling them digital assets so that everyone's on the same page. And you expect that you're going to get some kind of profit or return on the money that you've put in. That falls into what we call the Howey test, which is a Supreme Court case going back to the 40s, where it really said, if you're taking money from all kinds of people and putting it together so you can build something, whether it's a brick and mortar something, or now it's a software platform that's going to be used for encouraging, for sharing, say, cloud storage or something along those lines, and you as the holder who's been sold this expects that, hey, this is something I want to put my money into, not necessarily because there's a platform that's built and I want to buy it to so that I can get more cloud storage, but rather because the promoters have told me that, wow, this is going to increase in value and they have invested interest and they're going to go ahead and make arrangements to have these traded on a secondary trading platform. So there's an expectation that you're going to profit from this investment that you've made in this common enterprise where you're relying on the efforts of the developers or other people in developing the platform. And the way I like to look at it is, if you just ignore the word digital and you just think widget, and somebody is selling you a widget, and in order for the widget to have any value, you have to build a whole factory so that then you can profit from the operation of the factory in building more widgets, and you're going to get something out of it, whether it's the increase in value of the factory, which means that more people are going to want it, or the efforts of, say, the people who are behind it who also have lots of widgets, and they want, in fact, to be able to realize the financial profit or benefit that they could get from the widgets. So they have this vested interest in making sure that the factory gets developed and that there's a great interest in the widgets so that lots of people want to buy the widgets. And so what we end up with is something that in the digital space is really no different than the brick and mortar space. And I think that's why we're interested in it, because what we have in both cases is security. And if it's falling into the test and satisfying those requirements, you are making an investment in this enterprise where you're dependent on the efforts of these third parties. And your return and your realization on that is not coming from anything that you do personally necessarily. All right, it's coming from the development of the secondary trading platform, or it's coming from the development in addition of the actual operations of the digital platform. And the key behind the federal securities laws is really the protection of the people that are putting that money into it. They're entitled to the information to know where their money is going. What are the insiders doing with it? Where, when, if, and ever are they ever going to get a return? Or have they just handed their money over to somebody thinking, trust me? And I like to say that I went to law school in St. Louis, and Missouri is the show me state, so I'm always very much into show me, right? And I think the way I think we always look at it is, if you're asking somebody for money, I don't care what it is. If it's digital, if it's brick and mortar, you're still going to think about it in the same way, or we would think about it in the same way. And that essentially is the message of the Commission's 21A report that came out. Val was very instrumental in that report. And in the DAO, they call it the DAO, the DAO report, it made clear that the federal securities laws apply when you meet those kinds of tests, regardless of whether you're in the digital space or you're in the brick and mortar space. I think the only other point I would make, and then I'll quickly jump, is people want to know how come ICOs are so popular. This is all anecdotal. So much money is being raised in the ICO space based on what I call the fields of dreams. There is nothing there. Or as they say, there's no there yet in so many of these projects. It's a dream, it's a thought, it's a fraud. It goes along that, that line. People want to make money, and it becomes easier to raise money, not because necessarily the projects, in many cases projects are great and people are really behind it and they really want to do it, and in a lot of other cases they're frauds, and so we look at the totality of it, but I think why ICOs are so popular really is lots of hype out there.
Okay, I'm gonna move to Josh. Before and after this 21A report on the Dow, the commission